football game that we covered in yesterday's episode between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons. But today, we're going to be transitioning to the weekend's events in both the NFL and college football as well. We're going to continue with a vein of prop bets and betting in general, looking at some more generalistic Week 5 prop bets. I'm going to conclude my positional rankings for the week with the top defenses and special teams units that I believe will shine in Week 5 for you in fantasy football. Then we're going to do a special segment that I've never done before, picking 4 games from the NFL slate on Sunday and giving you my personal picks based off the spreads. Then we're going to look at the college football landscape a little bit, talk about some of the big games to bet on in Week 6 there, and concluding with an injury update in terms of fantasy implications for some key players who you might need to replace. But before we get into any of that, I do want to remind you yet again to, if you so feel inclined, like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network as a whole. It is greatly appreciated by all concerned, especially me and my fellow podcasters. It means a lot to us doing these kind of shows. But also, if you want to be an even bigger part of this particular show, continue to make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way to contribute to the show and interact with the show. Press that $, leave a comment, and it will immediately pop up on my screen, and I will share it to the general public watching this very podcast. If you have anything that you want to talk about, questions, comments, or concerns based off any segments, or just something on your mind, feel free to leave it in the comments section, and I will promise to address it as soon as I possibly can. Without further ado, let us jump right into today's show, starting off, like I said, with some general Week 5 prop bets. We did a kind of comprehensive look and deep dive into tonight's game between the Bucs and the Falcons, so we shift our attention to Sunday's slate. A lot of interesting players, a lot of interesting bets you can place on them in return. Without further ado, let's jump right into this. The first one that I wanted to present to you is a very intriguing one, and this means a lot to me as someone who's a fantasy football owner of this particular guy. He really had a breakout game. He finally did what he's been doing for the past couple of years with many different teams, whether it's his stop in Detroit, whether it was in Philly, and now it's Chicago. This is a vintage game from him. I think that he's going to continue with this week. So, my first prop bet that I want to present is DeAndre Swift going over 48.5 rush yards, minus 110, and he will easily hit that mark. He's going up against a Panthers team that, yes, is rejuvenated, but on the offensive side of the football. The defense, the less we say about them, the better. They're still one of the worst units in the league. They just lost one of their best defensive players at the position a couple weeks ago in Derrick Brown. And this game could turn into a shootout in that regard. And thus, the team that controls the football better, or purportedly has the better running attack, will win this game, in my opinion. And while, yes, the Panthers have Chuba Hubbard, and he's been looking pretty good in this new look Carolina Panthers offense now run by Andy Dalton, but that game that DeAndre Swift had showed promise because it wasn't the prettiest game from him, but it was a game that showed that the Chicago Bears can have variety to their attack. It's not just throwing Caleb Williams out into the fire, hoping he completes incredible passes week in, week out. There's going to be some balance. There's going to be some stability to this team. That's what I saw at that performance. And a game where, you feel like you should win, and you can win pretty easily if you can put up points quickly so that this Carolina Panthers offense can't catch up to you. It's going to be all about ball possession. And if, the Chicago Bears dominate the possession, then DeAndre Swift will have a big part in that. So look for him to get a lot of touches early, kind of dictate the tempo of the game, and most importantly, try and lead Chicago to another big win. And then they'll be over 500, and maybe all the worries that people initially had about this team early in the season might subside. I'm going to have to see how balanced this attack really is, though. The second one, we kind of went over this prop bet yesterday a little bit in depth, but I wanted to revisit it because it is a very important one if you're betting tonight's game, and that's Bijan Robinson because, like I said, he's getting a lot of touches, as Raheem Morris promised before the season start. But he hasn't really been effective. When, Algier comes into the game, for some reason, the offense clicks in the running game a little bit more. Tonight, I'm saying that he's going to hit the over, 62.5 rush yards at minus 113, but it's a tentative yes. And the reason why I think that is because in a divisional game, yes, there are many different ways that this game could get more physical than other games because it means more. But I kind of feel like Raheem Morris's offense wants to progress because of the fact Kirk Cousins feels like, at least in games of this nature, someone who can be the difference. And not for nothing, he has proven in the past 3 weeks, minus that one game early in the season against the Steelers where he looked kind of stiff, that he can still throw the rock effectively. So in this game, I'm looking for Kirk Cousins to potentially have a better game than people might expect out of him. I think he's going to have his high in pass attempts for the season, potentially his high in passing yard for the season as well. So the reason that Bijan Robinson kind of doesn't necessarily strike me as someone you should bet on is because of the unpredictability of this Falcons offense. And so I still think Bijan has a lot of value in terms of a betting perspective and potentially a fantasy perspective as well. We're going to have to see. And this game could be the litmus test because they might want to come out guns blazing with Kirk throwing the football early and often to try and compete with that high-powered Bucs offense. But they also might want to make that promise good to Bijan and give him enough opportunity to get as many touches as possible to get the yardage that we know he can. So this is a tentative one, but I wanted to revisit it a little bit more in depth. Another one that's kind of, out there a little bit in terms of a more long shot bet. How about Josh Allen going under 240.5 yards going up against Houston at minus 110? Now, like I said earlier in the week when I made my predictions, my bold fantasy predictions, when I said both Stroud and Allen would struggle in this game, I kind of meant it. Because if you look at both of their performances from last week, the Bills got exploited. The Ravens gave different teams, especially those in the AFC, the blueprint to break down the Bills. If you keep all Josh Allen's receivers in front of him, if you limit what they can do in the run game, if you load the box in the run game and play sticky coverage on the back end, then the Bills can be beat. And I think the Houston Texans defense is one of the more well-equipped ones to handle that because of the depth they have up front and the development of their back-end pieces as well. On the flip side of things, if you look at Josh Allen, last game wasn't necessarily his best game, but he certainly looked flustered in terms of every single option that he had being taken away from him. I don't necessarily think that will be the case against Houston. There will be opportunities for him to hit the occasional big play, but just note that, these receivers still aren't the most skilled receivers in the league. They're not necessarily guys who are superstars. They're role players who can, in effect, be effective in a kind of committee approach offense, like Joe Brady's trying to build. So, in that case, I was going to say Josh Allen doesn't necessarily impress. He's still going to have an effective game, keep the Bills on schedule. Like I said, don't expect him to pass for gaudy numbers anytime soon, especially against a Houston Texans defense that is stingy, even though they haven't been necessarily fantastic in the takeaways department. But yes, I think that this bet will eventually hit for you, and it's one that I'm willing to stand behind telling you guys this. Another one that's kind of under the radar, but can be a nice little development for you on the betting end of things. How about Deontay Johnson? How about that connection with him and Andy Dalton? That was not on my 2024 NFL season bingo card in the slightest. Deontay Johnson being rejuvenated as a receiver who, had glimpses of having a fantastic career over there in Pittsburgh, moving to Carolina, stagnating under Bryce Young, and then eventually, now with Andy Dalton, really becoming the wide receiver one a lot of people expect him to be. So in this game against the Bears secondary that I really love, don't get me wrong, he's really going to test them. I think that the verticality of this offense is back with him and Leggett. And, not for nothing, the Adam Thielen injury, not necessarily a blessing in disguise, because I never want to say that about an injury, but it really has kind of opened up both of these two receivers to bigger plays. And Andy Dalton has the arm talent and the experience to really elevate their play. And we've seen it in the past 2 weeks. So Deontay Johnson, look for him to be an underrated receiver, not just in real life, not just in fantasy, but as someone to place some more bets on for as long as the Andy Dalton ride is here in Carolina. And I think that, like I said, this Bears game has a chance to be a classic shootout where neither side, is going to gain the upper hand right away, but they're going to pick it at each other and try and find each other's weaknesses. So look for Deontay Johnson to exploit them. And the last one, this one is kind of like a geographical one, so to speak, if there's any such thing as a geographical-based bet. Justin Jefferson going under 82.5 yards in London against the Jets Sunday morning. Our time, their time obviously in the afternoon at -110. And the reason why is I love this Minnesota Vikings team. I think that they're one of the 3 best teams in the league at the current moment. This is a weird kind of trap game right now if you're Minnesota. If you're Minnesota, you have 2 of the biggest wins in the league going up against the 49ers at home and also being the Texans at home, and you already have a divisional win as well. But now you fly to London against a Jets team that's really kind of frustrated. An embarrassing loss against Denver last week. Different time zone, different acclimation period. Therefore, we don't know what to expect, I don't think, out of what Minnesota is going to look like abroad compared to what they've looked like thus far. Whereas the Jets, I feel like, there are a lot more worries about them right now than Minnesota. But their defense has been rounding into form. They're not playing in rainy conditions anymore, hopefully. And I feel like this is the week we're going to start to see more pieces of this Jets offense develop. And there have been trade rumors about a certain receiver over there in Las Vegas potentially coming over there trade deadline time. So that could lead to some excitement around not just the Jets fan base, but the Jets team as a whole. Because right now it definitely feels disjointed. But things could be moving on that front in a hurry. So look for Justin Jefferson to maybe have a worse game than you might expect out of him. More pedestrian numbers than you expect out of him abroad, rather than what we've seen from him to start the season. Let me know what you think in the comments, because all of these prop bets could hit, but they're just my opinion. I want to know yours as well. But coming up on the other side of this short break, we conclude our positional rankings with my personal top 5 defenses and special teams units to look out for on the fantasy football front. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I wanted to remind you yet again to, if you feel so inclined, consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show and the network. Greatly appreciated by all concerned, especially me, my fellow podcasters. Go check them out if you haven't already. They are doing great things in their own right. But also, most importantly, if you want to contribute to the show at large right now, make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Things, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way to contribute, great way to interact with the show, especially if you leave a comment by clicking on the $, leaving your comment as well. It will immediately pop up on my screen and I'll address it right away, and thank you for it as well. So, there are many ways to contribute to the show if you feel so inclined. Without further ado, let's get right into our second segment of today's show, and it's our final positional ranking of the week heading into Week 5 of the NFL season. Our defenses and special teams. Now, all four of these defenses I've compiled have many different stories to tell. Throughout the season, they've shown many different sides of themselves. There have been some ups, there's been some downs, there's been some peaks and valleys with all four of these defenses. Well, maybe outside of one, because it's probably the most opportunistic, most talented defense without much depth to it in the league, but I'll leave it up to interpretation. This is my personal list. Maybe if you want to leave yours in the comments to let me know, that would be fantastic. But for now, without further ado, let's just jump right into my first list. My first team here, I could have actually picked their opposing team's defense from this week because of how special they've looked. But it's the Raiders' defense. Like I said, I could have picked the Broncos' defense as well because both of these teams are kind of terrible on the offensive side of the football. But it's Bo Nix that the Raiders are going up against. They had 1 interception, 3 sacks, 10 fantasy points versus Cleveland. So as you can see, they feast on terrible offenses that haven't really found their rhythm. And you're probably wondering, well, Chris, this is a Raiders defense, mind you, that's had a lot of injury woes in the past. They've lost Malcolm Kuntz, the guy opposite Max Crosby in the defense. They've had Max Crosby out for a little bit of time. On the back end, they've lost guys like Divine Diablo and Jack Jones, and you would be right in that regard. They are very thin. But a lot of these guys have stepped up. Maybe it's the Antonio Pierce effect. He said he wanted to play physical defense when he started his tenure, and he wanted guys that might not get much attention as the stars of this defense, like Crosby, to really step up. And we've seen it. Robert Spillane, one of the league leaders in tackles this year. You've seen it time and time again. Yes, like I said, the Broncos' defense is also an appealing option in this game because the Raiders' offense are slouches as well. They're not the best. And the Broncos' defense has looked very, very good over these past 2 weeks, shutting down impressively a Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense that has 2 of the best wide receivers in the league, and a Jets offense that kind of expected to be a little bit stagnant to continue this season, but they have some good players, and it's Aaron Rodgers, for goodness sakes. So this feels like a game where defense could rule the day. So I'm saying the Raiders defense has the easier task because if you have any faith in Bo Nix, you might just be crazy in running this Broncos offense. I think that Buccaneers game, for example, was an aberration. We're not going to see many performances like that from him. So the Raiders defense could have an easier task. But at the end of the day, if you like defense, if you value defense as a position in fantasy football, look to this game because it's going to be a defensive slugfest, if anything. The second defense on my list is one that I'm very familiar with, and this could come back to bite me because of injuries as well, but it's the Seattle defense. I'm going to do something that I don't often do when I talk about these defenses, or different skill position players for that matter. I'm not going to mention the stats from last week's game. This is not a biased thing. This is not indicative, I believe, of what the Seattle Seahawks defense can be. Because yes, you can say the good things we've seen on defense from them came against weak opposition. They came against a rookie Bo Nix, a backup in Skylar Thompson, and a guy in Jacoby Brissett who is like a lamb for slaughter in that Patriots offense. And when they go into Detroit, depleted, bruised, battered, they had no chance against the Lions offense. Now they're going up against a Giants team that, their offense really hasn't clicked this far, and they're really hoping that they're going to get Malik Neighbors back for this game so that they can at least have a chance. But the reason why I'm saying the Seattle defense is one to continue to keep your eye on is I'm not necessarily making an excuse that if, they are fully healthy against a team like Detroit, they could have won that game. But it's a question, right? There's a question. There's a seed of doubt in people's minds about, how good would the Detroit offense have looked if, Seattle was fully healthy on that side of the football. And it's a Giants team that really, outside of Malik Neighbors, isn't special. And with a quarterback who can't really affect anyone with an explosive play here or there in Daniel Jones, then I see no reason as to why not, even if they're still missing some key players on the side of the football, Seattle will not have a good game on the defensive side. So look for Seattle to kind of have a quote-unquote bounce-back game. The jury's still kind of out, not just me as a Seahawks fan, whether or not they'll look good with all the pieces of their defense there. But in games like this, in winnable matches especially, look for them to look pretty good. And the next defense I want to talk about is one that is the king of takeaways this year. They're not the prettiest defense. They allow a lot of points. They have in the past couple of weeks. But the Green Bay Packers defense is one of the more opportunistic defenses in the league. Xavier McKinney, one of the league leaders in interceptions, if not the league leader, I believe, with 4. Jair Alexander turning back the clock. And it's just a defense that's really fun. They're going up against a Rams offense that, yes, have found different ways to utilize the depth that they have at their disposal, while with the absences of Kupp and Nakua, but it hasn't really been to the most positive effects. Yes, they got that kind of get-out-of-jail-free win against San Fran, but against the Bears, like I said, they were going to get exposed eventually. Against the Packers, if Matthew Stafford isn't on his game, we're looking at potentially a huge turnover battle here. Because, not for nothing, the Packers' secondary is perhaps the best in the league. 1 interception, 2 fumble recovers, 2 sacks for 6 fantasy points last week. So if you like more opportunistic defenses, yes, they may give up a lot of points, and that might affect their points tally in fantasy. But at the end of the day, if they can turn some of these interceptions into pick sixes, if they can turn these fumble recoveries into good field position, then it might not even matter how many points they're giving up. Because, like I said, opportunistic defenses are kind of some of the most valuable in fantasy football, if you guess my drift. And the next one I'm going to talk about, in the same division, in the same situation, but looking at this game, it's going to be a very gritty game, I think. Because on both sides of the offense for both of these teams, you have questions at the positions. For the Packers, if Christian Watson isn't healthy, how okay are you with the receiver core you have right now? Because every one of them in their own right is impressive. You still have Gene Reed, who could potentially be a wide receiver 1 on any given Sunday, or play like one. You have Romeo Doubs, who's a great red zone threat, decent verticality. You have Dontavion Wicks. You have perhaps the best tight end room in the league in Tucker Kraft, or at least the most versatile. So you're still asking questions, how do you distribute the ball? But if you're the Rams, you have lost a lot of depth at the wide receiver position. Yes, I like the upside of a guy like Tutu Atwell. Yes, I'm excited to see Jordan Whittington, and not just as a Texas fan who saw him in his career, get a lot of reps. Yes, Colby Parkinson as a Seahawks fan is someone who I know has a couple good games in him. But there's less optimism surrounding this offense now than there's ever been. And if you only put up 18 points against the Bears, that's worrisome. As much as I love the Bears defense, that's worrisome. And now you're up against one of the teams that can really, really hurt you in terms of taking the ball away. So it's not going to be a pretty game, I think, for the Rams offense. And then the final defense I want to speak about is one that we all know and love right now. I probably think that the way they're playing, they might just be the best defense in the league. I don't know of any other defense right now that I can say is completely without flaw, This one's pretty damn close. Yes, late in that game against Green Bay last week, they allowed a couple points, and they nearly let that game slip out of their hands, but the Vikings defense, really impressive. Kudos to Brian Flores for getting this group to be as opportunistic as timely as possible. I loved each and every single addition they've made in the offseason to bolster this defense as well. I love the addition of Andrew Van Ginkel, one of the most underrated linebackers in the league. I love the pickup of Jonathan Greenard, another underrated guy on the D-line. And in the back end, yes, you had this meld of youth experience. You still have a guy like Harrison Smith back there, but you have guys in Josh Metellus, Cam Bynum back there as well. And then you have a savvy guy in Ivan Pace, who's a really underrated player. I really like him as well. Like I said, this could be a potential trap game for them after traveling overseas to London to face off against New York. But if you saw the film, as Andre enters the chat, how are you, my friend? If you saw the film of the Jets game, it was brutal. Yes, I get the conditions. As Ryan Kennedy, welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, my friend. I've never seen that name before, so I hope you're enjoying the show. Asking me for some advice. Pick 2, as Tap to Learn says Patrick Jones II is a revelation. I'm not quite sure who that is on the Vikings defense, because there are a lot of people who have gone under the radar for them as well that I might not be mentioning, but thank you for the Patrick Jones shout-out, Tap to Learn. We're getting back to Ryan's quick comment here. Pick 2, flex spot, 5 PPR. Dell, Cortland Sutton, Chase Brown, and Rico Dowdle. I think that the Dell option is always solid, because Tank Dell is still going to be very valuable for the Houston Texans offense as the years and weeks go on, mind you. But I think that in terms of a PPR league, I feel like both Chase Brown and Rico Dowdle might not be the best options at the running back position. I mean, Rico Dowdle, not for nothing, did have a receiving touchdown in that game against the Giants, but at the end of the day, I kind of worry about how many targets he's going to get out of a backfield that really hasn't proven me anything. Whereas Chase Brown, he's not necessarily a pass-catching RB2 for Cincinnati, but he does have some yardage totals in him that could stand out in a PPR league. So the running back issue is a little bit more tough, because I would just go Dell straight away in terms of how the Houston Texans offense is profiling. But in terms of Chase Brown and Rico Dowdle, I think it depends on if you like a more yardage-heavy back, or if you like someone that, even though the offense isn't necessarily kind of tailor-made for success, can still bust a big play. So if you were to just put these two in front of me and say pick, demanding a choice, I would potentially go with Dowdle. But it's not the safest bet, I would say. I feel like Chase Brown, I can't ignore the fact that he looks explosive every time he touches the football at the running back position for Cincy. So it's definitely a weird one, but I would pick, if you just put this at face value, Dell and Dowdle. Hope that helps. I hope you luck. As Tap to Learn says, Jones has 4 sacks already for Minnesota at IDP Steel. Shout out to anyone who plays IDP at all as well. I love that version of fantasy football. But to conclude this segment, thinking about the Vikings defense, like I said, how can you not love a defense with not many quote-unquote big names being led by one of the great defensive minds in the league right now in Brian Flores, time and time again proving people wrong. That's all I have to say about that. But let me know what you think in the comments, as Ryan Kennedy says thank you. Thank you to you, my friend, for joining the show. Hope you have a great fantasy football week. As Andre also says, I think Brown is the future starter in Cincy. That's a bold take for right now, but I like it a little bit because he does look a little bit more explosive in that offense when I've seen him than Zach Moss. But without further ado, we do have to take a quick break. When we come back, I make my first ever Chris's Picks segment, talking about some games in this weekend slate that I think can hit big for you in terms of betting perspective, giving you advice on that front. We'll be right back after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed those first two segments. I loved every single comment you guys left in terms of both of those segments. But for now, we are transitioning to a new segment here on this show for my third one of the day. My personal picks, some of my favorite games of the weekend slate. My picks for Week 5. And potentially this could also give you some advice if you're looking to bet on some of these games. Now, all four of the games compiled are interesting in that they're either fascinating divisional games or they're just games where I feel like both teams are evenly matched. There are two that are actually the divisional games and two that are, more fascinating AFC or NFC matchups. Without further ado, let's jump right into them. Starting off with perhaps the best game in terms of divisional games of the weekend. Ravens-Bengals. Baltimore, 2.5-point favorite at home, over-under 51. So, odds makers Vegas, so to speak, expecting kind of a shootout here. And going off of what we've seen from both of these teams, it's tough for me to expect Cincy to really match up what will be seen from Baltimore's offense. But when I think about both of these teams and both of their profiles, I still think that, on the defensive side of the football, we haven't seen the best from Baltimore. I know it's funny to say after perhaps the best defensive performance of any team this season against Buffalo, but I still think they can be exploited vertically, so to speak. I think that Buffalo is kind of a more play-it-safe approach right now in terms of protecting the football, and so they haven't really faced a team like the Cincinnati Bengals where they are kind of pick and choosy in how they extend the field. Where they can extend the field at any time with guys like Chase and Higgins. So you better watch out if you're Baltimore. That being said, I'm really shocked at what Derrick Henry brings to this Baltimore offense. I thought that just bringing in one back, albeit an aging one, but he has been, as Andre said, can I hear your thoughts on my parlay? I would love to. I would love to give you any advice on your parlay for this week, and I wish you good luck in terms of that as well. But for now, let's kind of stick with the Ravens-Bengals game as Andre types it in the chat. My personal pick for this game, it's going to be the Ravens. I think that right now they just profile better than the Cincinnati Bengals, and Cincinnati's only win has come against a Carolina Panthers team that, yes, looks better, after the whole Bryce Young conundrum, but still is one of the worst teams in the league. And I still think, they're a good offense, but what we've seen out of Baltimore is that they can control the game like anyone in the league, better than anyone in the league. And that's going to matter in these divisional games. It's going to matter in the playoffs as well. So look for Baltimore to really make their mark with two huge wins in both the AFC and the division by winning this game. I think they win it comfortably. It will easily cover the spread. I think it's going to be a 38-27 game. The Bengals will try and keep up as much as possible, but the Ravens will just prove to have more offensive firepower that will ultimately wear down a Bengals defense that is one of the worst in the league. Then, hopefully Andre is typing in his parlay right now, because I'm really excited to hear what he has to say about it. Cardinals 49ers. This is a weird one, right? Because when the Cardinals offense is on its game, firing on all cylinders. As we get Andre's bet and parlays for this week, Kirk and Baker to both hit 230 plus. Actually, this is just for tonight's game, I believe. Godwin 70 plus, and London over 5.5 receptions. Okay, let me break this down one by one. Starting off with the two quarterbacks, both hitting 230 plus. I did say Kirk earlier in one of my segments would go under 240 0.5. But I can see a situation where playing catch-up, if the game gets out of hand for Atlanta, Kirk will be forced to throw more than he likes, and he can hit the over there. Baker, I'm not worried about, because Baker has two of the best wide receivers in the league, and he's playing with an energy or rejuvenation right now like he can't be stopped. So that bet, pretty much likely to hit for your parlay. And the second one, Godwin going 70 plus. I think that one's an interesting one because he has been, if you want my opinion, the better receiver out of both him and Evans throughout the season. He's been opportunistic in the routes he's been running. He's been opportunistic in the targets he's been receiving. And most importantly, in games like this, he really can make the difference as that second receiver who can wear you down rather than just one superstar receiver like Evans. So that being said, it's going to be tough to, see him matching Evans target for target throughout this game. But I can see a world where Baker's going to be fired up, want to throw the ball early and often, and Chris Godwin's becoming perhaps his favorite target right now. It's crazy to say with Mike Evans still there, but he has emerged as someone who has really improved through that relationship with Baker. So that could be someone that I'm a little worried about, but I still think has at least a 60 to 70% chance to hit on. And the London one, I think the London one should hit, especially if Kirk is looking for him in the red zone. It's going to depend on how many drives for Atlanta get to the red zone, but Drake London has proved to be the guy that Atlanta would like to have as a red zone threat. He's not necessarily the wide receiver one they imagined him to be, but he is still someone they value on the offensive side of the football when it's situational time for their offense. So I think that bet will hit if only Atlanta gets enough drives that matter in this game. They keep it close and say in the late third to early fourth, if they're trying to chip away at a deficit, then London will get a lot of targets. But this I like because you're aware both these quarterbacks have the weapons. You're aware that the weapons are used in many different ways, especially London. Most importantly, you took stock of how this divisional game could play out. Because, like I said, this game could go either way. As Andre said, is Bijan playing? Actually, I wouldn't know if he's injured because I did not necessarily, as I was researching for the show, get word that he would be. But if he is playing, then he also is someone who is going to bet. I see no reason as to why he wouldn't play based off of what I've heard from injuries. But thank you for letting me know. As Andre said, short week with a hamstring injury. Do you think they play it safe and feed Algier more? I actually did not know he sustained a hamstring injury that week. But either way, they have not necessarily fed Algier more, but Algier's touches have meant more for this Atlanta Falcons offense. They look like they've kept them more in schedule. So we'll see. If Bijan with that hamstring injury, like you say, I'll take your word, is hindered, then they're going to get Algier in the game, and Algier, proves that he's a worthy RB2 in that system. But Bijan is still a piece of this offense that you can't ignore. You know what I mean? He's someone that you have to account for if you're the head coach like Raheem Morris. But it's an interesting storyline, so thank you for bringing it up, Andre. But in terms of going back to the Cardinals-49ers game here, San Francisco 7.5 point favorites, that feels right. 49.5 points. The reason why I like this game, and it could be an either war, as Andre also says, bro, I can't believe Kanan got the hat trick to one game I bench him. That's kind of the way the cookie crumbles. I mean, I really thought that K9 would not have a good game in that game because of him coming back from the oblique, but he proved me wrong. He proved a lot of fantasy football managers wrong that week for what he did in that game against Detroit, especially against a run defense that's one of the best in the league. And it's safe to say that K9 really makes that Seattle offense tick, if you want my opinion. If it weren't for him, we wouldn't even have been in this game. So it just goes to show how versatile K9 can make the Seattle offense. I'm looking forward to more performances like that from him as a Seattle fan. But really quick here for the Cardinals-49ers game. It's an easy 49ers win if the version of the Cardinals offense that showed up against Commanders comes into the San Francisco Stadium. Bills-Texans, another easy one. Houston actually favored in this one, 1.5. I think the Bills will cover, win outright, rather, because I just can't deny Josh Allen's abilities. I don't think he's going to have yet another stinker after another one. I don't think he can have 2 consecutive stinkers, even though I still think he'll quote-unquote underperform in this game. And last but not least, an interesting game, Colts-Jags. Jacksonville, 3-point favorites at home, over under 46.5. This is going to be a weird one because we don't necessarily know. We'll talk about this a little bit later in the show about Anthony Richardson's situation. If it's Joe Flacco, I'm actually really excited, not just for him, but for the Colts wide receivers, because he can stretch the field more vertically in ways that can get them in open space than perhaps Anthony Richards can at this current moment, even though he has a very talented arm, and we know that. For the Jags side of things, I don't really know how you can spin this team positively if you're Vegas, even at home, because unless I see some miracle route running from this team, I'm not convinced that they can win. But let me know what you think, because all 4 of these games are interesting games because you never know. On any given Sunday, you never know what's going to happen. But let me know what you think. But coming up after this short break, we are going to be taking a quick look into the world of college football. Some big games, not necessarily the biggest games of the year in Week 6, but some interesting ones in terms of betting perspective. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And for this 4th segment of the day, we're going to take a little bit of a rest with football for a moment, at least in the NFL capacity, and transition to college football. Week 6 is going to quickly come upon us in a couple of hours, in a matter of 48 hours, actually. And even though it's not the most appealing week from a college football perspective in terms of top 25 matchups, there are still some intriguing matchups, as Top 200 says, AFC division matchups, slate surprises. I'm not going to touch this one. You could be wise in doing that. I think that for Ravens, Bengals, and Bills, Texans, Colts, Jaguars, they're all really weird games. I mean, Colts, Jags especially, because we don't know the whole situation with Richardson. And who knows, even if it's Joe Flacco has another great game like he did last week and like he did with Cleveland last year, I don't necessarily want to touch that game with a 10-foot pole if I were you. But going into the world of college, there are some very interesting games where you can get easy bets and just some weird conference games where it seems like the odds makers aren't telling us enough with the way they portray these games. Without further ado, let's talk about 3 of the games in particular that really stood out to me. Starting off with Clemson, minus 15.5, going to Tallahassee. Now, I know what you're thinking. This game shouldn't even be a betting question right now. This is an easy game if you're betting straight up spread for Clemson to give you a little bit of good cash. But it's just the storyline, right? Everyone, thinking that Clemson could potentially be facing its former QB in DJ Youngulele, and the different trajectories that teams have taken since, Youngulele left Clemson, went to Oregon State for a year, and now is on Florida State and getting benched, and now Brock Glenn is replacing him. And on the Clemson side of things, how Clay Klubnik, after kind of a stinker against Georgia, has emerged as one of the nation's better quarterbacks. And it just goes to show, how a division like the ACC, or a conference like the ACC rather, can change in an instant. Because both of these teams as well kind of want to leave this. They're suing the ACC to leave. And this game, yes, it's an easy bet, but the storylines of it make it run more deep. And not for nothing, this game in Tallahassee could be a blowout. But Mike Norvell has proven, if anything, that he is willing to take risks. DJ Uiagalelei was a huge one, and Brock Glenn trying to replace him, and admirably at that against a Clemson team that is probably saying "I told you so" with the whole DJ Uiagalelei thing, or thinking that. I think this game is one you either don't touch or just look at it and go, "I'll take the easy money." But just know that the storyline alone could impact this game in a weird way. But then again, I think Clemson just will overpower this Florida State team. Because right now, Florida State is not showing me anything. As Andre says, in PPR, who would you rather have rest of season, Wilson or Harrison Jr.? Interesting question here. Because Wilson has more room to grow with Aaron Rodgers, right? But Aaron Rodgers might not reciprocate. As Marvin Harrison, he's in an offense that can be tailored through him, yes. But in all reality, we've seen that when they start a game, occasionally he's going to be hot to start, but then he's going to quiet down as the game goes on. So, if it's a rest of the season thing, I would generally say Wilson here, because the Jets' offense at least will look, better for longer in certain games, whereas the Arizona Cardinals, I kind of want to see them vary their offense a little bit more, get away from just focusing on getting Marvin Harrison the ball. So, therefore, I think Garrett Wilson is still a viable option, because even though right now it doesn't look necessarily like the situation's going to brighten up there for him and Aaron Rodgers, he's still someone who Aaron Rodgers is going to have to account for later in the season. So look for him to eventually, not immediately, get on the same page with Aaron Rodgers and really help you in terms of your PPR league down the stretch. Hopefully, I'm right in this regard, because I could very well be wrong. Marvin Harrison Jr. could very well be a star this season, and the Cardinals offense could very well prove me wrong. But for now, I have to pick Wilson in terms of what I project for the rest of the season. And then back into the world of college football betting. I just wanted to put it here for the storyline, not necessarily for the big bet. I'm picking Clemson in this game. It's an easy bet. This game, however, taking place in College Station between Missouri and Texas A&M, two top 25 teams, could pretend to be interesting. Not necessarily for the playoff picture, I actually think, because Missouri was walking a thin line when it took double overtime to beat Vanderbilt, and Texas A&M, they're one of those teams that I eventually think will crumble. They lost to Notre Dame, who has one of the worst losses in the country, so by process of elimination, they could perhaps already be out of the picture for the CFP. But this game will show how far both of these teams have come as kind of mid-tier SEC contenders. Texas A&M actually only favored by 1 at home, 49.5 the over-under. So, the question about this game that I really have is, which team has taken bigger steps in replacing eras where, or kind of finding their footing or rebuilding in a way where they had moments and glimmers of optimism. For Texas A&M, coming off the Jimbo Fisher era, having a number of number one recruiting classes under him, and having it not come to fruition in his tenure. On the Missouri side of things, you finally start to see all of their prospects they liked, whether it be Darius Robinson, who's now in the NFL, Luther Burden, who's looking like one of the better receivers in the country, Brady Cook, who hasn't really performed to his standards this year, but we all know can be a competent quarterback for this Missouri team. And this is just a game where I'm not necessarily looking for playoff implications. I'm looking for signs of not just improvement, but signs of redemption for both of these programs. Because they want to prove that for all the talent that they've accumulated, they're not jokes anymore in the SEC. They're not just going to sit there idly by and not fight for their place at the table anymore. And while, this could be a sloppy game that you might not want any part of from a betting perspective, this one can be fun because, to start the season, Texas A&M actually had Connor Wegman at the QB position. Now Marcel Reed steps in because of his injury, and he's looked really good. Their defense, I actually think, projects to be better than Missouri because Missouri lost a lot of depth. They're still trying to figure things out, and they've looked kind of shaky against weaker teams. So I would lean towards Texas A&M, but if that Missouri offense gets clicking, if that Brady Cook, Luther Burden classic connection kind of reconnects and rejuvenates, then this could be a game. And it could be a game that spells interest, at least for both of these teams, to some CFP committee members. So look for this game to, while not necessarily the best of top 25 matchups, be one that holds a little bit of weight, at least in the room where it happens. The last game, though. This one's also one of those games where you can say, well, why even bother with it? Baylor, Iowa State. Iowa State, one of the only two undefeated teams left, along with the BYU Cougars of all teams in the Big 12, looking to cement themselves as one of the Big 12 title contenders against a Baylor team that actually kind of stunned BYU there for a bit before BYU eventually won the game. And not for nothing, Baylor under Dave Aranda has been an erratic team, but he's always proven that he can compete in the Big 12. Baylor is a typical Big 12 team no matter how atrocious or how good they look. They can always compete on any given Saturday. They can always trouble a team on any given Saturday, much like they did with BYU. They have an opportunistic defense and an offense that, if it's clicking, can get going. But Iowa State right now looks like one of those teams that, by tooth and nail, can just overwhelm you with their physicality. Their offense is timely, mistake-free, and their defense is physical and gritty. They're favored by 13.5 at home. Over-under is 46.5. That over-under is pretty generous. I think this is going to be a classic, low-scoring Big 12 game. Not one of those high-scoring ones that we see. I'm talking classic smash-mouth football. For Iowa State to win, just be yourself, especially on the defensive side of the football. I love a lot of their pieces, whether it be a physical linebacker and Cooper Ebell. As Andre says, who do you think is a big game tonight? I believe you're talking about the Bucs Falcons and not college football, at least. If you want my honest opinion, I think Baker's the easy option for the Bucs. But if you want an out there option, how about Cade Otton? I think Cade Otton is one of those tight ends where you know that he can have a big game, but you don't know when, and this could be it. I think that, as much as I love Evans and Godwin, two of the best wide receiver duos in the league, I think that at some point, you got to be looking for guys like Otton to eventually supplement what Baker's doing, because he's always going to fling the rock down the field more often than not, and that's what I expect. And on the Falcons side of things, Darnell Mooney has just been so unexpected, and he hasn't really shown any signs of slowing down, so why not Darnell Mooney? I know it's kind of a cop-out pick from his past couple of performances, but no one really expected him to start the year this strong. So look for Darnell Mooney to try and stretch this Tampa secondary vertically. It's a decent Tampa secondary. Still has Antoine Winfield Jr. in there, an all-world safety. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to win a divisional game and win it big and prove a point, you got to have some big plays. And Darnell Mooney has proven to be that guy. But pushing back to college football to kind of close out this segment, Baylor, Iowa State is really going to come down to the defenses, right? I trust Iowa State's more. And Baylor, they're their big thing is the run game, but when your quarterback and Sawyer Robertson is your leading rusher, it's not going to look pretty. Richard Reese was expected to have a bigger season, but he hasn't stepped up to the plate. And I just feel like if you're not necessarily the biggest big play offense, then you're not going to have much success. But let me know what you think in the comments. These 3 games are the only true games where I'm kind of interested from a betting perspective, but let me know what you think. But coming up for our last segment of the day, I give you all an injury update around the NFL and the fantasy fallout for you this week, and from a fantasy perspective with all these injuries. We'll be right back after this short break to conclude the show. Welcome back into our final segment of the day here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. But before we get into our final segment of the day, we've gotten 3 quick comments straight away. As Tap to Learn says, Kirk O'Chain's prime time curse gets broken. Well, the funny thing is, I think it already has been broken. He's won 4 of his past 5 primetime starts, led an impressive game-winning drive against Philly the last time out in primetime for this Atlanta Falcons team. So, I think it's already been lifted. And tonight, it's a tougher matchup, but who knows? If he can keep it close, if this kind of ball control heavy offense for Atlanta can dominate the time of possession game, then it can be a game. And Andre, on the other hand, has a question about his fantasy football team. Flex Christian Kirk or Kareem Hunt this week. It is time to drop Mark Andrews. And I agree with that. Mark Andrews has not looked impressive thus far this season. Done a lot more blocking, to be honest with you, than catching the football. As for the Christian Kirk or Kareem Hunt question, as much as I've bashed Christian Kirk on this show, he's the right answer here. I think that the Chiefs' running back situation is very, very screwy. As Tap to Learn says, Higher Baby by Creed. Great song. Don't necessarily get the reference, but, it's a great song anyways. But getting back to Andre's question here, Christian Kirk or Kareem Hunt, I think it's Christian Kirk, to be honest with you. And a couple of weeks ago, I probably would have been telling you to flex Christian Kirk or even start Christian Kirk, but, he's proved me wrong in some regards. As a receiver who stepped up, is one of the better route runners on this team. That's the thing with Jacksonville. If they just had better route running receivers, then Trevor Lawrence would have easier throws to make. He wouldn't necessarily have to be as reliant on his deep ball as we expect. And Christian Kirk has been that. He's not just speed anymore to me. He's someone who I can now look at and say, oh, I now see tape where he's running very nice routes. It's just a matter of, getting targeted, getting catches, and getting yardage and fantasy points. So flexing Christian Kirk would be a very nice option, and I agree that Mark Andrews has really been perhaps the disappointment of the season at the tight end position. But let's talk a little bit, not necessarily getting to a more morbid, as Tap says, it's Kirk Cousins' signature song. As a Texas Rangers fan, I can tell you that is our signature song as well that fueled our 2023 World Series run, but I digress. We have to get into our injury report to close out today's show for this upcoming week. And the injury report, we're getting a little bit more volatile, a little bit more sketchy, so to speak, because we don't necessarily know a lot of information about some of these injuries. But for the most part, you've known the story of injuries like Cups, Nakua's, McCaffrey, Samuels. These injuries that have been happening over the past couple of weeks, are more short-term, so you're going to have to look out. But then, of course, the Rashee Rice injury as well. But we'll start off with an injury that is more short-term. Perhaps as short-term as not missing any time, but with this guy, you never know. It's Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson goes down with a hip injury last week against the Steelers. Joe Flacco comes in, not off the couch this time, actually off the Colts bench, and delivers a decent performance. So, if it were Joe Flacco starting for the Colts, I wouldn't necessarily worry if I were a Colts fan. I would actually be a bit happy because the wide receivers look as good as they've ever been. Michael Pittman had a season high in yards. Alec Pierce now looks like he could be a vertical threat in this game, like I mentioned. And suddenly, this offense, much like what with Carolina saw with the whole Andy Dalton situation, could be rejuvenated. But the thing is, it could only be for one game. He is still day-to-day. I haven't heard any kind of reports from whether it be the Colts camp, ESPN, what have you, about which quarterback will start. What I can say, he's at very least day-to-day. But with him, they probably don't want to rush him back if he's not necessarily fully healthy because of what happened last season. So Anthony Richardson, I think it's safe to say that you should bench him. I wouldn't necessarily have started him anyways as a true starter in any league right now because of the fact that he is boom or bust. But that's the situation with him. And Joe Flacco might, as a result, be a nice little stream for you as well. But then let's go to another weird injury here because I don't necessarily know how the fantasy implications of this one works out because he's not, as valuable. But he is still a fun asset to that Saints offense. It's Taysom Hill with the abdomen injury. He's unsure if time will be missed. I think this is very similar to the Richardson situation where if he's not fully healthy, you keep him out. But there really isn't any fantasy implications surrounding, as Andre said, is Henry untradeable now, seeing the offense run through him? Yeah, I think he now is. And it's funny because I was very, very wrong about him to start the year. I was very low on this. It's one of those acquisitions rather, in the offseason that I absolutely did not like for the Ravens because I loved, when they were healthy, the committee approach of both Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins in that room. I thought that it was a lot of fun to watch all three of them and Jackson just wreak havoc in the run game on opposing defenses. And I was like, if Derrick Henry really the answer to really supplement Lamar Jackson? Turns out he is. I was completely wrong about him. And in fantasy football, he is untradeable. I think that, as the season goes on, he's only going to get more touches, only going to get more comfortable in this offense. And he's proven that he still has it. And other aging running backs, like Chubb, Hurt, Kamara, topsy-turvy performance throughout the season. So right now, Henry is kind of carrying the load for 30-plus running backs right now. And it's refreshing to see because I love to be proved wrong, especially in this kind of situation. But, it is what it is. And this goes to show how deep the fantasy football pool right now is. Going back to the injury status of Taysom Hill, I don't necessarily think you have to worry. You have many Saints on your team, like Kamara, like Olave, like perhaps Shaheed. I don't necessarily worry. As Andre said, would you start Garrett Wilson or Brian Thomas this week? Just because of, the whole London situation and the acclimation period, I would start Brian Thomas because I think Garrett Wilson is going to be affected as much as Justin Jefferson. And, I don't necessarily see how, if, the whole tension between him and Rodgers is carrying over, how it will stop immediately in just one game, especially an overseas contest. That's just my advice. Brian Thomas, isn't someone who I would immediately pick over someone who is still a star wide receiver in Garrett Wilson, but at least for this week, going up against the Colts defense that is average at best. Hopefully Brian Thomas shows out because I have high hopes for this kid. I love this kid in this Jacksonville Jaguars offense. It's just a matter of, whether or not this Jacksonville Jaguars offense can get anything going. Whether, Trevor Lawrence stops feeling so much pressure. So that's the question, really. Let's get back briefly to the injury that really shook the league. We actually just got update on my phone from the NFL Network saying that Rashee Rice was placed on the IR. Let's talk about how this truly impacts fantasy football. And it really impacts the Chiefs. Because if you think about it, they haven't really been strong in the run game, even with Pacheco. Worthy, he's a fun player. I love Xavier Worthy as much as the next Texas fan or person in general to watch. Travis Kelce, he's someone who you just can't help but appreciate for what he's done in the league as a tight end over the past decade or so. But it's looking dire right now in Kansas City. And it's a season-ending injury for Rashee Rice. I think this trip on the IR pretty much seals that fate. So it's ultimately up to you to kind of determine whether or not you can really trust a guy like Xavier Worthy, who's much more of a gadget kind of player than a true wide receiver one than anyone else in this team. Because Travis Kelce, as much as I love him, as much as we saw that he can still have the occasional good game, he hasn't really looked himself. And he can't be expected to carry that much of a load in terms of target share in this offense. Especially if they're not going to lean as heavily on the run game. Let's go to show, that by signing Kareem Hunt, it's not necessarily a position that the Chiefs are too worried about, and that's kind of scary. Because we kind of need right now at least a complimentary running back to help. Because Kareem Hunt, I don't really like at this stage of his career. As someone who is, at best, a workhorse back, as Tap Tone says, your boy Worthy gets fed, Kelce wakes up, damn Chiefs adjust. We'll see. Because if there's any team that you shouldn't down in the league, it's Kansas City. Because of the way they just find ways to win. But right now, it's looking bleak. I can't say that because Patrick Mahomes as well. And he's acknowledged this himself. He acknowledged that he's not playing the best. And when we see it on the field, we see the turnovers that have taken a huge rise, a meteoric rise for him and his standards to start the season. As Tap Tone says, Reed figures it out by week 7 or 8. We'll see. That's all I can really say right now. And Tap to Learn says it's not sooner. Again, I'll have to see it to believe it. Because right now, the Chiefs are a team that, yes, continue to find ways to win. But I just don't see it. And this injury is really. But just some quick hitters here. The Christian Watson injury, the high ankle sprain, shouldn't be out for as long as Andre said. I have 2 IR spots being used by Brooks and Pacheco. Do I drop Brooks so I can place Rice on IR? Yes, because I think what I hear out of the Panthers camp of things, Brooks is starting to recover pretty decently. He's been on the PUP list for a bit longer than expected, but I could see him coming back. To see him being a nice little supplementary piece to the shocking Chuba Hubbard, if Andy Dalton continues to be the back. So I would say placing Rice on IR is a smart move, and Brooks could eventually be a nice piece for your fantasy team after he comes back as well. With Christian Watson getting back to him, the high ankle sprain, I think, it was tested Monday. Could be placed on IR himself, but I don't think that this injury for the Packers is really that detrimental. But you know what you think. But here's another note. I said about the Brooks injury, that he could be in practices for the Panthers. 2 other players, very popular fantasy players. TJ Hawkinson from the Minnesota Vikings could come back from the PUP list. And Chubbs, be wary of them. If someone hasn't already drafted them, hoping that they will be back sooner off the PUP list than expected, then be very aggressive on the waiver wires in that regard. Because this is the time when all these PUP players can be eligible to come back to practice. So watch out for that. But that will just about do it for this edition of the GSMC Fantasy Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for your lovely comments. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network as a whole for allowing us to host the show. But with that being said, I've been Chris Shepard. Thank you all. Like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network as a whole if you so choose. Keep on making yourselves available to the comment section. As Andre also says, I'm trying to trade for running back right now. It's looking bad. Hopefully that will get fixed for you immediately, my man. But thank you all for watching. As he says, my backups are Ramondre and White. Those are decent backups. I wouldn't necessarily worry about that. So hopefully you can find another guy to supplement that. But that will just about do it for the show. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Andre, saying great show today. We'll be back tomorrow, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, to close out the week. But without further ado, I am out for today.